Okay, this is going to be a video on Python, calling it Learning Module 7, and it's about functions. And so our learning objectives for this learning module is to understand modularity, what it means to programming, and we want to develop an understanding for the use of functions in Python, okay? So to understand the concept of modularity, let's first think about garbage. Let's think about reusable and recyclable things. So think about all the stuff you throw away. Think about how you could reuse some of that stuff that you threw away. And so this concept of reuse, like, how you take, um, a plastic jug and you reuse it to make something in programming, this reuse is extremely important. We want to build our code so that we do reuse it. We don't want to be throwing our code away after it's used once. We want to basically build up a library or build up our toolbox of code that we're able to reuse. By doing so, it cuts back on our time, it makes us more efficient, and we're able to solve problems much easier because what we're doing is we're bringing solutions from the past and we're using them to solve today's challenges. So what am I talking about? Well, one thing you can think about in reusing code is, for example, let's say we wanted to sing happy birthday to somebody using code, and you would have to type something like this in your program. So you would ask the user what their name is, so you'd use the input function to get their input. Then you'd have a series of print statements, and then you would do it again. Okay, so all of these times, or all these instances where you have code that is repeating, then this is where you should use or incorporate modularity. Okay, specifically for Python, this is where you would use a function. We know what functions are. We've seen those before. Functions are anything that has these parentheticals, has these parentheses, like input, left parenthesis, right parenthesis. That is, oh, that's actually an error. That is actually a function. So when we see code that repeats, like all four of these print statements, or this input state, this name equals input, all four of these print statements, and then that's code that is repeating. This is a perfect opportunity to use a function. Okay. So when we want to write a function in our code, okay, I'm using a new screen video making, and so this is my first time using it, and so I was actually looking at how do you pause the recording, and so I don't think, I don't think you can. Okay. Well, but I can jump back and forth. So this video is going to be jumping back and forth of talking about the lecture slides as well as doing some programming. So make sure you have your development environment open. We have our interpreter open here. We're going to start up a new file. I'll put these side by side to each other. And so this is going to be my new file, and it's going to be Python application using functions. Okay. So let's go back to our slide. Okay. So anytime that we have code that repeats, we know that it's a good opportunity to have a function. So what is a function? Well, a function, especially from a syntax perspective, a function looks like this. It uses the word def, means define, and then a name of a function. So we, in our example here, we called it sing happy birthday. Okay. And it typically has parentheses, and then it'll have a colon. This is the syntax right here to establish that you are defining a function called sing happy birthday. When you hit enter, you notice that it automatically indents the next line of code. When it does this, remember what we call this. This is now a block of code. Okay, so now I could say print happy birthday to you. You can end that one, and let's just do that a couple more times. Okay, so these three print statements right here all belong to that block of code that belongs to this function definition called sing happy birthday. So this is a function right here. This is a function definition. You got the keyword def, D-E-F. You got a function name. It's a name you've got to come up with. Make sure that it's something that has meaning, has a meaning to it, that you understand what the function does. Well, mine's called sing happy birthday. So this function must sing happy birthday. You've got your parentheses with nothing in it, and then you've got a colon. I'm going to come back to the parentheses in a minute, okay? But for right now, let's just do this. And let's just keep it there. Let's just stop there, okay? So I've defined a function. Now here is my main thread of execution. And let's just say print program is executing, and end that. So I want to save it. All right, so I saved it. So let's look at this. What's going to happen when we run a Python file? We had always talked before how everything is run sequentially. So it starts at the first line, goes to the next one, goes to the next one, goes to the next one. Well, when we have functions, what the execution does is it comes into this file, starts executing, and it skips over this function. So none of this actually executes. And so then it goes down to my first line of code that does not belong to an indented block, and it'll begin executing that. So my main thread of execution, that's why I wrote this comment, will begin here, and it's going to print program is executing. Okay, so I've saved it. Now I want to run it. And as you're going to see on my output, program is executing. Okay. So you look at this, you look at my file, and you say, well, I wrote all of this code that belongs to this function, but none of it executed. Why is that? Well, it didn't execute because the terminology is we didn't call that function. We didn't tell that function to execute. If we want that function to execute, we have to call it. And we call it by actually typing its name, sing happy birthday. We actually have to write its name so that during program execution, so the program's going to execute, it's going to print that. Then it's going to come down here and it's going to say, oh, what is this? Well, it's going to look up in here and it's going to see what was defined and see that we have a function defined called sing happy birthday. So program control is going to go from this function and it's going to jump into this or this function call, and it's going to jump into the function and execute these 3 lines of code. So we're going to save that and we'll run this and we'll see we got program is executing. Right there's the output. Then it makes the function call, and then it outputs the 3 lines that happen in the function call. Okay. So now anytime that I want to sing happy birthday, all I have to do is make this function call. So if I just say sing happy birthday, so I've called it twice, just run it, see what happens. Look at how many times it prints happy birthday to you on the screen. So every time you call this function, that's the code that's going to get repeated. It's like a remote control on your TV. Every time you push the volume up button, all of the code in behind in the TV and it's going to actually execute and turn the volume up on your TV every time you do it. So every time you call this function sing happy birthday, this code is actually going to execute. Okay, now the one thing we need to talk about though is inside those parentheses, we need to identify what arguments we want to pass our functions. And so anytime you have a function like this, you got defined a function called sing happy birthday, and then you have the parentheses. Right now we left it empty. That means we did not pass it any arguments. But if you put an argument in here, let's just say name, that means this function takes 1 argument. Okay. Now, whenever we call this, now if you were to run this program, let's save it. I want to get rid of this second function call. Let's say we save it and we're going to run this. This is actually going to raise an error. And we're going to see the error. Let's look at this. It's going to say program is executing. That's right. We wanted to print that to the screen. Program is executing. And then all of a sudden you have this traceback on line 12 with this function call, sing happy birthday. So line 12, if I look down here, yep, that's line 12. It has a problem with this function call. The exception that got raised is type error, sing happy birthday, missing one required positional argument. Okay, what does that mean? Well, let's look at this. Here's my function call. I'm calling the function. Well, what function are you calling? I'm calling this one. Well, if you call this function, it is expecting that you pass it some variable, some value. So you got to pass it one argument. So if I was to say something like sing happy birthday, Marcus, now it should compile and now it should run just fine. Now it doesn't use that argument. For you to use that argument, now I would say print happy birthday, dear, plus name, plus end it. All right, so now if I run this, now I'm actually using the variable because I'm making the function call. I'm passing it the argument. It's a string, and it's a name of some kind. So it makes the function call, so program execution comes into this function. It passes the value Marcus to it, and then it prints happy birthday to you, happy birthday to you. Then when it gets to this line, happy birthday, dear, and then it uses this variable, this argument, in the expression for string concatenation and passes it to the print function. So this is a way that you can pass values back and forth between the main thread of execution and your function that you have going on. Okay. So that's what you're seeing here. We're getting the input in the main execution thread, and then we are calling the function and passing it the name, the value of that variable. Okay. Now, we've seen functions before. These aren't new to us. We used the length function, the len function, L-E-N. That len function returned the number of how many characters was in that string. We've used the print function. It always takes an argument. It takes a string argument. Okay. So notice the parentheticals, the parentheses that are used. So we've used these functions before. Look at the len function down here. It takes one argument, message. Now, here's a new concept that we've also got to learn on top of using functions, and that is functions can also return a value to the calling program. So, for example, in my function right here, I would say I'm defining a function. Here's the name. I'm using the keyword def. Here's the name of the function. I'm passing it an argument. And here's all the statements that I want to execute every time the function is called. If I was to say return true, then basically whenever this function gets called, these lines of code are going to execute, and then when this function quits executing, it's actually going to return a value to whoever called it. Let's just say return 13. Okay. You can send any type of data type back. You can send Boolean, so true. You can say return a string. Let's just say return Fisher. Okay. Now, what this means, though, is in my main thread of execution, I'm going to say, okay, it's going to print this string to the screen. It's going to make a function call, and it's going to pass it the argument. Okay. However, the problem is making this function call. All of these lines of code are going to execute, but it's going to be returning something to this calling program, to this calling line. So I have to have a variable ready to catch it. So I could say last name equals sing happy birthday. And the reason is that because the function is going to return a string. So then this is me passing values back and forth. I can say print last name. I'll save it. I'll run it. And you notice it does program is executing. That's this line right here. Then it makes the function call, passes the argument, this string called Marcus, to the function. It executes these 4 prints. So here's the output of those 4 prints. And then it returns this string, which is Fisher, which as soon as this function gets called, it's going to return that value Fisher and assign it to that variable last name. And then I'm going to print the value of whatever that variable is. So that's why you see Fisher here. Okay. So this is, you're calling a function and you're passing it in an argument, and you are returning a value from the calling program. Okay. All right, so let's just recap here. I probably went over a lot of these slides already, but so we have 3 parts to the function. We have a name of the function. You got to come up with that. We have the parameters or the arguments of the function, and then we have the body of the function, which is the block of code that belongs to the function. Okay, so here's an example function to compute the average when you give it a list of numbers. So I'm just going to go through, I'm just going to skip over this because you can pause this video and you can type this in and you can muck around with this function here. But you're basically how to calculate the average. If somebody gives you in your program, if you have a list of numbers and you want to calculate what the average is, you can have a function do this for you. So you can follow along here. So I advise that you pause the video now, type in this function, and get used to messing around with this. Okay, here's another example. In this case, we've been using functions that take only 1 argument. Here's an example where we take 2 arguments, and you separate the arguments that are passed to a function using a comma. So if our sing happy birthday, you could say name and age. I'm going to separate that. So this function here, sing happy birthday, actually takes 2 arguments. Okay. Now, the problem is, and let's just say I'm going to use it. I'll say print, you are years old. Okay, that's all well and good. I'm going to use it. I remember I got to convert age to a string so it can be printed. So I saved it. So now let's run it. Oh, I got another error. Sing happy birthday, missing 1 required positional argument age. Similar problem as last time. What happened? When I made the function call, so look at this. When I make the function call, it's wanting to call this function. Where is that function? It's right here. Okay, how many arguments does this function take? It takes 1. It takes 2. Well, how many did you pass it? I only passed it 1. Okay, so you need to pass it 2 arguments. So happy birthday. There we go. Giving it 2 arguments now. Now I can run it. You are 49 years old. Okay, so you can have functions that take multiple arguments. If you don't know how many, if you want to create a function and you don't know how many parameters that the function is going to receive, you can put an asterisk in front of the argument. And that means these alerts, I got to turn those off here. That means you can call the function with however many arguments that you want. So if I was to say, that's a bad example, but actually I'll pause it here to see how the video is going.